Thank you. So welcome today to this event on alternatives to procurement. We're really looking forward to this. It's an issue that many of you will be aware GCVS has been seeking to raise over the last few years, and I think we've learned an awful lot about how commissioning can work better during COVID, where we've seen more flexibility, and we're hopeful to see what of that we can keep going forward, and what new ways and indeed existing ways there are that we know that will work. We see commissioning as really critical. Getting commissioning right is a really critical part of building collaboration between the public and third sector. It sits in that territory, and it's also a really critical part of making sure we're designing services that are responsive to the needs of the people that we're all trying to work to help. I'm not going to speak a lot this morning, but I am just going to do a little bit of introduction. So first of all, we do have a chat function, and I would urge folk to say hi, to introduce yourself, let us know where you're from, and make any comments in the chat or ask any questions in the chat that you want to. Secondly, if I can ask people to stay on mute for the duration of this, unless you're speaking, just means that everyone's call quality is as good as possible. That's all I'm going to say. We have a couple of speakers this morning before we go into workshops. You should have the workshops that are available. We'll cover them later on, and we will, through Zoom, give you the opportunity to choose the workshop that you want to attend. So our first speaker this morning is from Scottish Government. Sarah Bruce, are you ready to start? And I think we have slides for you, is that right?
Yes, so I don't know if it's easier for you guys to share the slides or for me to try share screen.
I think Zara is on it for you already. Is that right, Zara?
Thank you, Zara. I'm not saying no to somebody sharing the slides for me.
Yeah.
I'm not used to the Zoom technology and presentation mode, so that's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, if you just want to let me know when to next slide, I'll do that.
Yeah, if you just go on to the next one after, that'd be great, thanks. Oh, it's taken a wee while. Yeah, if you go on to the next one. Oh, there we are, sorry. Okay, so thank you everyone to having me along today to speak about whole family wellbeing funding. It's a good opportunity to talk about this in the context of commissioning and procurement, which is obviously something that's kind of really key in terms of what we're trying to do in terms of transformational change with this funding. I was asked to provide a kind of background of the funding, and I'll end by touching on some of the points in terms of commissioning and procurement that we have been looking at. And yeah, really interested to hear discussions later on as well to help inform some of our thinking as well around this work. So to recap for those that aren't aware about whole family wellbeing funding, this was a 500 million commitment across the lifetime of this Parliament to build and scale holistic whole family support right across Scotland. And fundamentally, what we're trying to do with this funding is to transform family support services at the local level. We're wanting to ensure that family support is something that families can access whenever they need it, where they need it, for as long as they need it. And we want to ensure that family support really caters to the individual needs of families. So we're taking a truly holistic view to how we support families. Those that are aware of the promise as well understand that transforming family support services is really a critical part about how we will deliver on our commitments in the promise. Because what we're trying to do with holistic family support is to ensure that support for families is preventative and also takes an early intervention approach. So we really want to be able to support families as soon as possible to help avoid them going into that crisis sort of position. And with the promise, what we're trying to do with do that piece of work is to ensure that children can be raised safely within their own family setting, and where that's not possible, that the right support's there to help them and to help families in those positions. So in terms of the promise, the promise actually published its recommendations first, and then not long after that happened, the COVID-19 pandemic struck. So those two things were kind of considered at the same time. And what we did in government was to look at a kind of collective vision around what we wanted to see for for holistic family support, building on what the promise recommended, and also trying to look at that in the context of COVID-19, which I think really changed things for us in terms of thinking about how we want to transform family support. And we established a collective leadership group that looked at these issues and helped to build on that vision to really say what we wanted to achieve through whole family support. Sorry, I'll admit this person, I get distracted by the pop-ups. And then that helped us to really formalise the vision of what we're trying to do through whole family wellbeing funding. So in terms of whole family wellbeing funding, we are focused really on trying to deliver whole system change. And I think sometimes the kind of simple way to say that is that we're not really wanting to support the kind of business as usual activities through this fund, but we're really wanting to transform support services at the local level. To ensure that support services are joined up, take a multi-agency approach and also a multidisciplinary approach in terms of supporting families, and that those local services are able to work collaboratively. So it's about ensuring that those structures work for families rather than against them. And through the promise, we heard that one thing that was particularly difficult for families was being referred from service to service. So it's about trying to make sure that that feels really seamless for families and that they don't really see, you know, the back of the house, if you like, in terms of the systems to support them, that they just feel that support around them in a seamless kind of way. If you wouldn't mind moving on to the next slide, please. So how do we get there? We had a lot of discussions on how we move into our vision into something actually practical, which is always the tricky part. We established a family support advisory group that helped to really draw down and think about what the kind of barriers are in terms of trying to deliver our vision. And to help kind of focus that work down, we drafted a route map. I have it on the next slide, but not skip forward just yet. Effectively, what that tried to do was to look at what the key primary drivers are, for those that are familiar with the sort of driver diagram type model, what those primary drivers are for change, and secondary drivers to really break down what we want to do for family support. We also, building on what the sort of promise told us, we also established a set of national principles on what holistic family support, holistic whole family support should look like. So that really helped us to say what we want that support to look and feel like for those families that are experiencing it. So that's about ensuring that we take a needs-based approach. That's about ensuring that we take a relationship-based approach, that we collaborate with children and families in the design and delivery of services. And you know, we take that multi-agency approach so they feel that kind of support in a seamless way. We also worked on a toolkit which was to help local services to self-assess where they are around family support and use the structure of the route map to help drive that, the content of that toolkit. So that helped us to sort of really dig a bit deeper, if you like, into what we're seeking to achieve with family support, and to help areas really self-assess and think, are we doing these things in the right way? What are the right questions we want to ask? Are we really consulting with children and families, for example, in a way that's collaborative? And it really kind of drilled down the detail of that. So we can share that toolkit with you after the event today. And in terms of the broad outcomes of what we're looking to achieve through this fund, these are quite high level, but I think it helps to give that sort of oversight of what it is that we're really looking to achieve overall with the funding. We want to improve family wellbeing. We want to reduce the gap in wellbeing outcomes and reduce those families requiring crisis intervention. So if we put in effective preventative early intervention support systems around families, you know, we can help avoid them from reaching that crisis point. And fundamentally, we want to reduce the number of children living away from their families if we can make sure that that support system wraps around their needs and really helps the families to do that. And more fundamentally, we want to be able to increase families taking up wider support. We want it to feel like something that's easy to access, free from stigma, and something that families can just routinely do when they need support. If you wouldn't mind moving on to the next slide, please. So this gives, hopefully you can read it, it's quite small writing, but this gives an overview of our route map or our driver diagram, another way of looking at it, to see how we broke down those key drivers in terms of moving forward with delivery. And if you look at the green section, the whole system approach, you'll see that transforming commissioning and procurement is a key secondary driver in there about taking that whole system approach to change. And I imagine there's a lot of sort of key themes in there that people will be familiar with in terms of what we need to do in transforming services. So at the very top, having children and families at the centre of design is a really key point, in that we're ensuring there's meaningful participation with children and families in the design of services. And like I said before, when we drafted a toolkit to help local areas self-assess where they are in family support, we used those key drivers to help focus that content, and the secondary drivers to help us really tease out those key themes. If you wouldn't mind forwarding on to the next slide, please. So this is our national principles that I discussed about holistic whole family support. So what we're really trying to achieve and have family, how we want family support to really feel for families. I'll not go through them all because we'll be here for a while if I do, but hopefully these are themes that are familiar to you and make sense. We also ensured that when we drafted the framework that or the toolkit, sorry, for self-assessment for local areas, that these themes were reflected throughout that framework as well. And so we tried to use that to bring everything together and help, reflect those principles. But as I sort of mentioned before, in terms of drawing on the recommendations of the promise as well, and what we're trying to do for support services, these try to tease out those key themes as well about, support being non-stigmatizing, so families feel that it's easy to access them and they don't feel that judgment. That we take a needs-based and a sort of relationship-based approach in terms of supporting families, and that is rooted in GCVS, which really goes without saying in terms of what we want to do for families. And also, under point 7, takes account their voice, that we consult with them, that we gather their feedback, and we do constantly reassess and ask ourselves, is this the best, is this the best type of support for families? Are they telling us that it works for them? So I will share these slides with you afterwards so you can look at these in more detail, and they are on our website as well. If you want to move forward to the next one, please. So what has happened so far? So we've really been focusing investment in those areas where we think we can try and make that sort of biggest difference. So this year was our first year of funding, and we've allocated 32 million directly to local areas to help them build local service capacity, because we recognise that we're asking a lot in terms of the transformational change we're seeking to achieve through the whole family wellbeing funding. So we want to focus that investment on trying to build that service capacity at the local level. And that has been driven through children's services planning partnerships, who are the kind of key strategic mechanism for planning for children's services and bringing together the right partners to assess need and respond to need. So the funding decision making, if you like, at the local level lies with them. We have also been trying to establish partnership working arrangements with 3 CSPPs. So we went through an exercise to assess applications for this kind of a collaborative support, where these 3 CSPPs will be supported by a national team to help them really accelerate their learning in this work. We also want to try draw that learning that with that and that collaborative support together to help inform that learning more system wide. So we want to use that more intensive partnership working to help feed into learning on a national level. So it won't take place just at the local level and then kind of not be shared more widely. We want to sort of establish a kind of network where we're able to share the learning that's coming out of that intensive support and really understand and help share solutions where local services are unblocking some of these challenges. And to help support that work, we're establishing a learning into action network. So we're in the process of co-designing that network and co-delivering that with our stakeholders. And some of the work from those collaborative partnerships that we mentioned above will feed into that, and will help share the learning that comes out of that. But we'll also look at what sort of common challenges that the CSPPs and their partners are facing at the local level, and we're looking at how to sort of build that programme up right at this moment, really, and think about how we can, support people in a thematic basis, for example. Do we pick key themes? Do we sort of pick common challenges? So we're really in that sort of planning stage with this network. And last week, was it last week? Yes, we checking with my colleague, we spoke at the Children and Young People Improvement Collaborative. We had a session on the Learning into Action Network where we're trying to sort of get feedback on what we can do to really help local areas. So use that feedback to help shape our programme going forward. And of course, we have to make sure that we evaluate all this work, and we've recruited independent evaluators to help us with that, so we can understand how we're making progress as we move forward and think about if there's anything we need to adapt and what lessons are coming out, commonalities and so on. So we have specific independent contractors who are evaluating the two main themes of this work to help us move forward. If we could skip to the next slide, please. So coming to the real nub of what we're talking about today, commissioning procurement was cited as a particular challenge for local areas, and we do hear that quite often, that it's something that we need to look at in terms of that whole system change context. And as we can see, it was a secondary driver in our route map as well, so it's well recognised as an area that we want to try and do some work on. It's not without its challenges, and sometimes I think getting to the real the real focus on what we want to do going forward can be difficult. So I'm interested to hear feedback from people attending today about what's worked in their area, what learning they're able to draw out. We're always open to hearing views about how we can improve this going forward. But the element two, which was the collaborative partnership work that we discussed. So this is a particular area we could focus on, the challenges around commissioning and procurement, and taking a kind of place-based approach and seeing if there's things that we can learn or do from that kind of collaborative support and help share that learning more widely. So there's an opportunity there for us to explore that in more detail with those three areas that we're working with, who are working with the national support team, and sort of draw some of the learning out and share that more widely. There was also a working group that was brought together to kind of reflect on some of the challenges for commissioning and procurement, and they helped to draw out some of the key themes around these challenges, and we also drew them into our toolkit that I mentioned, Supporting Families National Self-Assessment Toolkit, and we reflected the key themes, the key challenges, and what the sort of expectations are around commissioning and procurement in terms of family support services. So they are also available in our self-assessment toolkit, and we hope they are helping local areas in their work moving forward. And we've also been working with Scotland Excel and how we address some of these challenges and think about sort of, is there opportunities for training, for example, at the local level? What's our kind of offer where we can really help local services around navigating some of the challenges here. So I think it's fair to say that we've started to think about this, but we're by no means we don't have a sort of fixed plan or a real specific idea about how to move it forward on a sort of grander scale, but we really want to hear from you about how we can help, what the challenges are, and to help us reflect it on this work going forward. So I think, we have some way to go to help address some of these challenges, but very willing to listen to the views of yourselves around the table today and help feedback some of that and how we can reflect that in our national support and the whole family wellbeing fund. And that, I think, was my last slide.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Zara.
Thanks, Sarah, and thank you, Sarah. That was a really good and interesting start. And I think that the context of things like the whole family wellbeing fund are really prime examples of where actually commissioning is so important to get it right, because the whole aspiration of that is around changing the system, around improving collaboration and understanding the needs of citizens and being responsive to them. And if we don't get commissioning right, it risks being a block to all of those things. So I think it's a really good start. A quick reminder, everyone, we do have an opportunity for Q&As after our next speaker and before we go into workshops. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat or be ready to get your hand up quickly when we come to that point. But before we do, I'm going to bring in our second speaker, who is Neil McKechnie from CCPS, the Coalition of Care Providers in Scotland. Neil did an event with us earlier this month, so it's great to see you back again, Neil. And if I can ask you to set off, and I think you're doing your own slides, am I right?
Yeah, thanks Ian, and thanks for having us back. I've got my own slides, so I'm going to attempt to share my screen. So if you just bear with me whilst I do that. There we go. That should hopefully be it. I can only see a couple. I can see one or two people on. So if somebody could give us a thumbs up to see you can see that, okay, that would be grand. Perfect. As Ian said, I was very kindly invited back to speak at this event following an earlier event with GCVS earlier this month. So my name is McKechnie, and I am an associate on behalf of the Coalition of Care and Support Providers in Scotland. So CCPS we're a members-led organisation who our members cover all areas of social care. So it's not just focusing on adults. So our members cover adults, children, families, justice, housing, homelessness, addictions, mental health, physical and learning disabilities as well. So the full gambit. And also our membership covers around about 90 of the largest or about 90 of the social care third sector charities, and cumulatively we represent around about £1 billion worth of revenue to the Scottish economy. So a fairly large, well represented body. My colleague Catherine Garrett also works on the commissioning and procurement programme, which is funded by Scottish Government, and CCPS has been involved, similar to GCVS, has been involved in looking at commissioning and procurement reform for a number of years. Historically, we've looked at how what the commissioning issues and challenges are just with our members or providers. But latterly, last year, kind of 18 months ago, we decided we would see what would happen if we got our commissioners and our providers in the same room to discuss the challenges that exist within commissioning and procurement. And that's where we started to develop our collaborative commissioning programme, which was facilitated by Graham Reekie of The Lasting Difference. And it was great to hear actually what Sarah was talking about earlier, about the collective vision, multidisciplinary teams, whole systems approach, all coming together to really deliver better outcomes for people. And that really chimed with what I'm also going to talk to you about today, but also what set off as a premise for our programme. So what we did, we set out a programme where we wanted to have a balance of providers and local authority commissioners and procurement teams to come in and give some views round about commissioning and procurement. When we set off on to deliver this programme, we had no idea it would be as popular as what it was, to the point where we had to go down the route of applications to get our group sorted. So we ended up with 6 commissioners and 6 providers. But wider than that, because we got such a good response and there was such a lot of interest in the programme itself, we set up a wider reference group, which included disabled people's organisations, Scottish Government, COSLA, Scotland Excel, I think we're on there as well, and other local authority commissioners and providers who weren't able to commit to the full days that we required. So we ran this over 6 months, and the reference group was there to act as a sounding board to check some of the resources that we're putting together. And one of the first things that we wanted to do was set the tone straight away. So the tone was, talk to us about your challenges. So we had our commissioners and we had our providers around the table, and well, it was the virtual table. And what we quickly discovered was the challenges were very much the same. The context might be a little bit different, or the viewpoint might be a little bit different, but the challenges underlying were the same. And that's where we came to this, your problem is my problem. And that opened up a whole range of conversations when we understood that there's commonality around about what we're trying to do. And actually, we all wanted to do a very similar thing, which was let's get better more purpose-designed services that meet the needs of people, not just a recycling of a tender that's been put out a few years ago that's now up for review and we do the same thing. There was an appetite for change, and a lot of that was fueled obviously from the public feeling review, which albeit does focus on adult services, but a lot of that can be applied to all social care services, not just adults. I will give you one apology. There are many cheesy pictures that will come up at the side of my slides, so apologies for these in advance. But one of our secondary kind of tasks for the group was for them, not for CCPS or the lasting difference, but for the group to decide on what is collaborative commissioning. What does it mean to you? Because we might think it means something, but others might mean something different. So we thought it was important for the group to give a definition, and they came to the conclusion that for them, and this might not work for everybody, but the realization was for these guys, collaborative commissioning involves working together as equals to plan, design, and provide social care services which are easy to access, give choice, and meaningfully involve people in understanding the outcomes they want to achieve to have a good life. And again, if I look back to some of the slides that Sarah was showing, I think that chimes quite nicely with that. But I was really struck by that definition and thought that's a really well captured definition that I think many people could easily get on board with. So what else do we need to know about collaborative commissioning? Well, it's going to squarely focus on achieving better outcomes. We want to move away from a continual emphasis on price and competition, and as Feely said, work towards collaborative approaches to commissioning and to delivering servicing, to get better innovation, to create space for innovation to happen, to learn about the data that we've collected about services and that informs needs, and use that to design newer services that may kind of support the achievement of outcomes. And that's not to say that all services that go on just now don't do any of this or aren't very good. It's a recognition that there are some good services and there's good approaches to commissioning, and we want to do more of that. And these seems to be the things that are important to enable these factors to take place. Commissioning must be participative, so involving people with lived experience, carers, local communities, providers, and other professionals at all levels of commissioning, from the strategic planning end right through to the procurement of individual services and supports. And that's one of the things that we felt was really important with this as we go on, was that often commissioners, they'll deal with the planning, the design, and depending on the local authority, the HSCP, some of the resourcing and the delivery factors, and then procurement deal with purchasing, and it can be quite separate. And what we're trying to, what we were able to do through that programme is encourage and show the importance of bringing everybody along in the journey together, so people can understand this is what we need to do and why a particular procurement route would be better, as opposed to the traditional kind of, it must be a framework, it must be for 3 years, and it must be a 40-page contract and a 30-page tender with lots of questions that need to be asked. It's about striking that balance was seen as really important. And when we started to get into that conversation, it was quite clear that for the group that I'm trying to imagine alternatives to competitive tendering can be quite difficult, because that's what we know, and often that's what we're comfortable with. And because we understood that that was not a blocker, but it was certainly a challenge to those in the group, we engaged the services of McRoberts, who are a Glasgow-based law firm, and in particular we engaged Robin Fallis and Gwen Murphy to come along and speak to the group about what you can and can't do under our current procurement regulations. Now, I won't go through what all those kind of are today, because the regulations are pretty long and can be quite complicated. But what we have got is, and what we asked McRoberts to develop for us as a direct outcome of our programme, is a myth buster. So something that enables commissioners, enables our providers, where they're given a challenge about, oh, we can't do this because procurement rules don't allow us. We've got a myth buster that will likely say, actually, here's a scenario, and here's what we can do within the realms of the regulations. And actually, in our procurement regulations are really quite good. They're quite flexible. They're just maybe not used particularly flexibly. So it's understanding what that is. And we can understand that local authority legal teams can be under huge pressures. They're capacity bound, and they might be dealing with a guardianship issue one minute, a property issue the next, and then having to deal with procurement the next. So we felt that this would be a good resource to support people looking outside what the alternatives are. So the alternatives can be things like long-term flexible frameworks, option 2 budgeting, and there's others that are in development, like alliancing and community commissioning. Alliance is quite new, and it can sound quite daunting about what you have to do, but a lot of these alternatives really focus on bringing people around the table, getting people with lived experience, getting the commissioners, the providers, and key community groups around the table to talk about the challenges, to talk about the plans, and to work out what the best approach is. That's really the critical thing. And I'll probably sound like a bit of a broken record because I'll say that probably quite a few times today. And there's a quote just at the bottom of that slide from the Feely review, which again I know was based on adult services, but again, if you take the adults out of it, I think it's still really pertinent within all aspects of social care. So shifting from competitive to collaborative commissioning must take place. Alternatives to competitive tendering developed and then implemented at pace across Scotland. So again, listening to what Sarah was saying there about wanting to overcome these challenges with commissioning, I think that's really, really key. And the focus on the person's needs, not solely being driven by budget limitations. And I know that can be a really difficult, it's easy to write something like that. I know it can be incredibly difficult to do in practice, particularly given current circumstances that we're in just now in the financial climate. We couldn't ignore ethical commissioning. Of course, it's a fundamental part of what commissioning reform is all about. And during our programme, and a kind of similar strand of work, CCPS were supporting Scottish Government with ethical commissioning and what that could look like and what it could mean. And we were very pleased to see some guidance that was sent out to all local authorities, albeit under the guise of you must be preparing for the National Care Service, and ethical commissioning is something we want you to consider as you're preparing for the NCS. And they've defined the ethical commissioning principles within that guidance note as being person-centred care first, having a human rights approach, full involvement, people with lived experience, fair working practices, high quality care, climate and circular economy, financial transparency, commercial viability, shared accountability. All principles we can all get on board with, absolutely. And principles that I have to say Scottish Government are really committed to embedding within practice and within guidance. And I'll come on to a little bit of that as we go. What I'll do as well is once I've finished talking, I will pop this link into the chat and encourage you all to have a look. So it's our resources. So our resources are free and accessible to everyone to look at and to download. There were two key resources that came out of our collaborative commissioning programme. One was effectively a guide on what is collaborative commissioning and how can we go about doing it, what things can we consider and what things could be used as a basis to formulate discussions. It's written in a certain way that it's there to be considered, and it's not a blueprint about this will get you to collaborative commissioning, because your needs could be different from the needs of somebody else's and the outcomes of somebody else's as well. So it's important that that's put into place. But the resources are very good at facilitating these conversations, getting people to think a little bit differently. So there's one resource which is kind of a bit of a guide about collaborative commissioning, and the second one is what I alluded to earlier, which is our myth buster. on procurement regulations. So I would encourage you all to have a look, and I'll pop that in the chat after I've finished speaking, and also have a wee quick squint at any questions that may or may not have come through. So how did we then go from collaborative commissioning to arriving at a new programme which is called Commissioning for Outcomes? Well, round about this kind of time last year, Catherine and I reflected on the programmes of work that we had worked on in terms of our collaborative commissioning and the feedback that we were getting and some of the key principles that were coming out of that, and felt that Commissioning for Outcomes was going to be a fairly natural kind of next stage of the work that we wanted to do and to extend the programme. So we set about kind of designing a new programme, which we started probably just the tail end of summer this year. And again, we invited a mixture of key stakeholders to be part of that. So we've ran sessions with disabled people's organisations, we've ran services with our local authority commissioners, and we've ran sessions with our members. And we decided we would do this approach in running separate events to really just focus in on those key stakeholders' views at that one point. So things that get conflated, and to make sure that the groups are small enough that those who may not like to talk in big environments got the opportunity to give their views. And we also asked for some written views as well, again, just to try and capture the best amount of feedback on what does Commissioning for Outcomes mean for you. And that was really the question posed, and that facilitated a discussion. So Graham Reekie from Lasting Difference, we engaged Graham to operate those sessions and to facilitate those sessions on our behalf. And this is a bit about kind of where we are now. So we've ran our individual sessions, and we've ran a couple of joint sessions as well. And what you can see here is we've done some desk-based research, we've spoken to our focus groups, and we've collated some of that feedback so far. And to date, quite a lot of it is quite similar, which is good. And the language that we're choosing to use is affirmative. So we're not saying outcomes-based commissioning should or could. We're saying outcomes-based commissioning will involve the right people in sharing the risks and responsibilities, be manageable and proportionate, and make the most of existing resources. What we're looking to have at the end of our programme is it's going to be kind of twofold. So we're going to hopefully produce a video about what Commissioning for Outcomes could look like, why it's important, and things to consider along that journey, alongside some written resources as well. We're not quite sure what shape the written resources will take just yet, because they're not finished. We'll get them finished probably early in the new year. They might take the shape of some how-to, but they might also take the shape of you're a new commissioner and you've been told by your chief officer to do Commissioning for Outcomes. What do you do? And we might take that approach to seeing if we can answer some of those questions and signpost in the right way and provide some resources that way. One of the other aspects of things that came up that was consistent across all of the groups was a cycle of retendering and no platform to build outcomes on. And that's what we were alluding to earlier, that the norm to repeat what we've already done before and just to go through that cycle. And the cycle's quite short. So you have year one, which is contract take on, you're trying to implement things. Year two, maybe getting to grips of where things are. Year three, you're then having to prepare for a transition to a tender and potentially moving that service to someone else. So then the amount of ability to focus on individual people's outcomes becomes difficult in that sense, because the length of time just isn't there. And that's just a wee bit about kind of what I've just described there. And yet in between all of that, you've got all the compliance exercises that we go on. And again, the compliance of KPIs, care inspectorate data, that all came out consistently across all of our groups to say, maybe we could look at data differently, and maybe we should look at what we're recording, why we're recording, and look at other types of data, like measuring outcomes, tools that are specific to measuring outcomes. What do they look like? Who uses what? What are the benefits of them? And how can we use that data to inform service design and development going forward based on their effectiveness to meet people's outcomes? And in many respects, that can let some commissioners step back, let people and providers define the outcomes, because they're the ones that are generally going to have that close relationship. Now, this also came out about commissioners don't have the capacity to take all this on board themselves. And actually, it's if we all work together, if we all do that, getting around the table, then we have that shared accountability and we build that trust and we build those relationships. That means that it becomes a joint approach. And we involve our colleagues, and it's not just, when I talk about commissioners, it's not just about the commissioners and the providers, it's really about the legal teams that exist within the HSCPs and the procurement colleagues. They play critical roles in all of this, and they can play a critical role in reform and looking at change as well. Create links between the individual and strategic outcomes. So again, as opposed to maybe just looking at the high level strategic outcomes and building things around that, look at, well, what are individual outcomes? What do they look like thematically? And how can we ensure that we work towards those and we're guided by the proper strategic outcomes and principles? We got into a little bit of governance after all this, and people were talking about contracts. And again, we invited McRoberts, who we engaged with our collaborative commissioning programme, to come and have a chat to us. And they were very good at coming up with a phrase which is just enough due diligence. So what would be just enough to ensure that an individual is happy that a provider is going to meet the outcomes that they want, and what's the right amount or just enough due diligence for a local authority to be comfortable that provider can deliver on what they're saying. So again, some of that comes with trust and relationships, but it's about getting to grips with, well, what is that? What can that look like? And they're going to put together a resource that's an extension of their Mythbusters to help us consider what that could look like. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, ethical commissioning is a real key part of all of this, and CCPS are really pleased to be invited on to the Scottish Government's ethical commissioning workstream. And that group is led and hosted by Scottish Government, but the participants are those from COSLA, Scotland Excel, there's HSCP, colleagues are there, and there are other key stakeholders too, I think from Care Inspectorate as well. And that's a group which is focused purely on delivering an ethical commissioning framework. So they're not looking ahead to the National Care Service, they're looking to ethical commissioning. What can we implement right now? What can we change right now? And how can we share the good practice that exists? And how can we promote alternative traditional tendering? And that's what that group is designed to do and to be set up as. So it's one of the only Scottish Government groups that's not just focusing in on the National Care Service. And one of the things I would say about everything that I've spoken about today is we don't need to wait to see what might happen or might not happen with the National Care Service and what services could end up be migrating to a National Care Service or not. Reforming and changing commissioning and procurement can happen right now. All these practices that we've just discussed there, we can do that today. And we are aware, and we're actually working with a number of local authorities who are bought into change, who recognise that that cycle just doesn't work, doesn't cut it anymore, it doesn't do any good for people using social care services, and they're looking to change. And for that, CCPS absolutely applaud those, and we're delighted to work with them. And we've spoken at different local authority events and shared our ideas and acted as critical friends as well when they're looking to do something differently. And again, I think the basis of all of what I've gone over today is really about getting around the table, bringing people together and discussing what's important to them and how can we make that happen, in the knowledge that our guidelines and our regulations around about procurement will allow all that to happen. We've got a legal framework set up. It's just about using it effectively. So that's some contact details for myself and my colleague Catherine Carrad. So after today, if you have any queries, questions, or you have difficulty accessing resources, please let us know. We'd be more than happy to hear from you. If there's a particular aspect of commissioning procurement that you'd like to discuss, again, please do get in touch. We are, as I mentioned earlier, we are funded by Scottish Government, and I think that says quite a lot about their commitment to changing how commissioning procurement works within social care, as they've funded us now for a number of years, and we meet with them very regularly to talk about the joint approach with our providers and our local authority partners, and we share good practice with them, and they look to build that into their policy, and that informs some theoretical commissioning work as well. So we're very pleased to have that relationship with Scottish Government. So that's enough for me. Thank you all for listening. I'll stop sharing my screen. And that's us. Thank you all. I'll have I can see Susie's posted a link in the chat. I'll post another link as well that has the other resource. And that's us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Neil, and thanks also to a speaker from the Scottish Government as well. I'll open it up. Sorry, I haven't got a pit. My camera has decided not to work on Zoom today, but I can hear you all, and I can see you all, although you can't see me. So I'll open it up for questions just now. If you can either put it in the chat or you can put your hand up. I'll just do the one from the chat first, and then I'll move on to well, in fact, Raymond, presumably you're going to ask the question that you put in the chat, are you? So do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if MD had seen it. Yeah, it was just what part do local authorities' standing orders play in the commissioning process and procurement decisions? Because that's what's been quoted to us by our local procurement manager, is that everything has to go out to tender because that's the standing order, which I'm not sure about.
So we have heard that quite a lot, and that is can be a default position. That's one of the main reasons that we put our Mythbusters guide together, because it might say that in a standing order, and whilst we understand that that's important, and whilst we would be seeing that a local authority would need to go to some level of due diligence, what we're trying to use the Mythbuster is just to get people to think a little bit differently, to say they don't need to be quite as regimented. There are other ways to do things that are probably less capacity bound as well, so there's benefits there. In terms of the detail of the standing order, I'm not quite sure what that would actually say, but in terms of going through a non-standard procurement process, that can absolutely be done. You can do direct award to a certain amount, you can set out an individual budget, you can have a much longer term framework style contract as well, so you don't need to do the usual 3 to 3 years with maybe a year's extension tagged on. You can do a number of different things without going outside the realms of the procurement rules and regs. So again, with what would maybe suggest, Raymond, is if you were to grab a copy of the Mythbusters, have a look through it, and you could always fire that on to the procurement manager there and have a discussion. But again, one of the things that we've felt and found has been beneficial, particularly with one of the local authorities we've been working with, East Renfrewshire, is that they've brought their procurement team along to the events and to the facilitated sessions, so that they can understand why the normal procurement routes might not be as beneficiary as indeed if you were maybe purchasing lots of office equipment, for example. You're looking at people's outcomes and wanting to get better outcomes for people. That type of traditional procurement doesn't quite work as well. So I hope that answers your question all right.
I don't, I'm not seeing any other questions here coming up or in the chat. Oh, Pauline, you want to ask something?
Yeah, it's I guess an observation and a question. I think CCPS's work is to be commended, and I think where you've made strides, and hopefully where at times in the past I've made some strides, is not just talking to the third sector about procurement and commissioning and then going to talk separately to the commissioners about procurement and commissioning. That tends to breed contempt. And sometimes, and I think what you've done very well, Neil, at CCPS, is actually bring the commissioners into the same room with providers. And you're absolutely right. We want the same thing. We want the same. We want better outcomes for individuals who use services. And we're just coming from a slightly different perspective on that. And I think that's where you start to get some traction. You start to get building a wee bit more respect and understanding of those different perspectives and positions. And you can start, I think, to unpick some of the myths around why things can't be done in a certain way, and probably why commissioners or procurement in the past have just reverted to tendering and retendering exercises without actually having the ability and the time and permission to stop and think differently about how they could achieve better outcomes. And the last thing I would say is I think contract management is really, really important in all of this. And I don't think contract management is probably got enough focus about how services are being evaluated, and therefore should they continue or be retendered. And the data in terms of that is important. And I mean sharing of data between the provider, the individual who's receiving the services, and the person that's commissioned. And the last thing I would say, which you alluded to slightly, and it probably hopefully reflects some of the things that Sarah, you said, was the commissioner and the procurement, they're not really a community. They're called the commissioning and procurement community, but they're not really a community quite yet. They have their slightly different functions, and what we need to do is start to make sure that they're talking to one another at the front end of procurement. And we're all then going on a better journey, I think. Thank you.
Thanks, Pauline. And I see we have another question in, this time for Sarah, I think, from Saquib at Homestart, Glasgow South, saying, how will the wellbeing funds be distributed? How will the third sector access funding?
Yeah, I can answer that. So the funding is being distributed through the General Revenue Grant to local government, with decision making around spending and planning resting with the Children's Services Planning Partnerships. But we have offered flexibility for some of that funding to go directly to the third sector if the CSPP wanted to do that at that local level. So at the moment, it's going through local government to the General Revenue, through the General Revenue Grant.
Okay, and I know in Glasgow, I don't think they've made a decision on whether they're going to direct the funding to third sector or not, but it's something people need to ask in their own local authorities. Raymond again.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. That's where the procurement question came up for us. in West Lothian, because when we had our initial discussions that we're part of, when it came to project ideas and what the process might be, it looks like it might be bids from departments or whatever for projects or for ideas. But when it came to the third sector partners around the table, we were told, well, that would have to go out to tender. And that was whereas the alarm bells started ringing about the distribution of this in terms of using commissioning.
Raymond, were you speaking in terms of the funding directly to local authorities?
Yeah. In terms of how that's distributed then on.
Yeah, so I think it's probably fair to say that most of the CSPPs are still in a kind of early stage of looking at how they're going to use the funding. So I would say, yeah, definitely worth engaging with them. I think a lot of them are still at the point of assessing need in their local area and thinking about how best to spend. So some of that's being used in terms of building capacity and services, for example, or staffing, increasing staffing. So sorry, I missed, you said that they said that they'd have to go through the procurement process for the funding to go to the third sector. Was that the feedback you got?
Yeah, I mean, we're still very much at the planning stage in West Lothian in terms of assessing need and those kind of things, you know, and we're all part of that process. Yeah, but when it came to actually, you know, when we got to the stage of looking at, well, what do we want to deliver and how we're going to do that, that's when we were told, well, if it was any third sector partners, then it would have to go out to tender. And that was just the initial reaction. So that's why we're here exploring these options. Yeah,
of course. I mean, the funding going directly to local authorities doesn't circumvent that, the sort of, you know, what's been expected, what you would expect to happen at local level in terms of procurement and commissioning. We aren't able to kind of skip over those requirements, if you like. But I suppose in terms of providing some reassurance, the funding is being allocated on a multi-year basis. So if there's not that scope within this year, that doesn't mean to say there's not scope in future years for going through that route as well, if need be.
Okay, Neil, I think you wanted to come in there as well, and then I think there's a question in there from Graham that you might want to address as well.
Yeah, Raymond, just on that point, funding like that could also be treated as a grant, as opposed to going through the kind of traditional tendering route. A grant might be more, it might be kind of more in line with what the outcomes of those projects might want to look like. So again, something else to consider. I'm fairly certain our Mythbusters touch on that as well, about the differences that you can utilise grants for, and I think that could be quite a good point to make.
Certainly something we could share as well, Neil, more widely with our contacts in local government too. Yeah,
it's just to explain that there are other avenues of how the money can be distributed. We know it has to be quality checked and somehow, but it's I suppose back to that point about it's getting that balance right, versus how much, and then how much of kind of evaluation scrutiny is going to be placed on that. So yeah, that's all good. I'm just looking at Graham's question there. Commissioner and provider, how's this being addressed? That's that'll be the $1 million question right there. There is you could see that being a massive conflict of interest, and I suppose there'll be some kind of guidance around that, but I'm not sure. Sarah, I don't know if you have anything specific.
So yeah, I mean they are the statutory lead partners. How has this been? I mean, I don't have a clear answer because, like you say, then lies the rub of every piece of funding that you might give to local government, where they would then utilise third sector services to deliver on their behalf. I mean, I don't really have a clear answer to say how we get over that. I think more generally what we're trying to do with our funding is to give local areas the flexibility to look at what they want to do within their areas, and third sector partners are certainly, we've made really clear in our funding criteria that we expect the third sector to be a key partner in this, and when it comes to assessing need, when it comes to planning, you know, as they should be as part of the CSPP operation more generally. So I don't think it's necessarily a case of just local government or perhaps, you know, the health board making those decisions. They should be made in collaboration with third sector and the key partners at the local level, which is why we expressly said that the expectation was around you know, the Children's Services Planning Partnership making those decisions. But yeah, we have been clear that it should be a collaborative process.
But it's, excuse me, it's just an inherent flaw, which, you know, is always there. But
yeah,
in this particular instance, you're talking about whole system change. And I'm just wondering if this could be, if anyone had thought about that part of changing the system. Because I feel sorry from a commissioner's side of things as well, because they're not really independent to be thinking about which services they should be commissioning, because they are employed by an employer that delivers a lot of those services. So you're never going to get that independent view, and you're never going to, I don't think anyway, get that ability to jointly plan around the needs of families in this instance. Obviously, this affects all sorts of commission decisions, but it's just one of those ones that we just happens again and again and again. But I think it's directly linked to us not providing services that families need and want at the times they need and want them.
I wonder, just going back to Pauline's point about data and evaluation, whilst that happens maybe at the maybe slightly wrong end of this, if you've got that situation of commissioner and provider, then if we look at data capture and how things are evaluated, you can make more evidential based decisions about what needs to continue, what doesn't need to continue, what needs to be changed and why it needs to be changed, and what needs to be future planned. So there might be a role just looking at data. That's not going to resolve the whole scenario that happens between that commissioner and provider person, but it is about looking at the actual kind of the net effect of the funding, what's it doing, and what outcomes are being delivered as a result of that, and are they the right outcomes for people? They might be the right outcomes for part of the system, but that's neither here nor there. It could be, are they the right outcomes for people, for those who are actually utilising those services?
Okay,
yeah,
Laura?
I'd be interested if there's thoughts that we're missing a kind of a better way to. Is there a better way to do it that's obvious here that we're missing? I don't know if Graham could.
And not in 30 seconds, no.
No, it's not a problem to solve in 30 seconds. It's not a problem to solve in an afternoon session, really, either.
But I'd love to, I'd love to chat, but I'm sure colleagues here would have way more experience than I would. Maybe I'm a sole voice in this, I don't know. I'm seeing the comments. I might be an outlier, I'm not sure.
I see a couple of hands left up here, and I'm going to take those two and then stop because we're running over. There will be an opportunity to have more discussion when we get to the breakout rooms later on and mull over these things along with what you hear in the workshops about how people are already doing things differently. But I'll take first Laura and then Pauline just to final comments, questions on this section.
Thanks, thank you. Can you hear me okay? You're sharing a speaker, okay. Thanks, it was just to build on what Sarah was saying in terms of, with the funding at the moment, we're trying to practically work on where we can statutorily send money to, so we can get that out, but through the criteria around the funding and the fact that we've made really clear that that needs to be a CSPP decision, and they need to kind of work that through on a collaborative basis in terms of how they want to plan and deploy that spending. So it's not just sitting with the statutory partners of the CSPP. That's really clear in our criteria for the funding. But Graham, as you say, you know, this funding is about whole system change. So absolutely one of the things that we want to hear as we test and we learn as this funding is deployed is, you know, where are the barriers here? What is working? What's not? What would be a better solution around this? So the kind of things that you're describing, if they're starting to become evidence coming out of this work where we're saying, you know, this would be a better way of doing it, that's the kind of stuff that we want to hear, so that we can see how we can test that and try to move things. Because when we talk about whole system change, we're not just talking about at a local level, we're talking about what do we need to do at a national level. But we need that evidence base to do that, and we need to be able to kind of work through what those implications would be, etc., as you'd expect. So I think, you know, that there's kind of pragmatic constraints that we've got with the current system, but I think, as Sarah was saying, we really do want to hear the ideas about how we can take away some of the barriers to kind of delivering on the principles that we all share in terms of family support.
Okay, I think if we go to Pauline, and then I'll take any sort of final comments from Sarah and Neil.
Thanks, Susie. Laura's said a lot of what I wanted to say about removing the barriers. So it was really about Graham's question about conflicts of interest. And conflicts of interest where money coming locally and decisions being taken locally. A way to overcome that, I hope, would be, as Sarah said earlier, involve the third sector and wider stakeholders at the earliest part of that process at a strategic level, so that there's no surprises and there's a level of transparency and respect about how the third sector providers can feed into that process before decisions are fait accompli. So that will dilute, I think, the conflict of interest, recognising that each partner, local authority or HSCP included, has a role to play in the delivery. But that doesn't always happen, but ideally that would be a way to, I think, reduce that tension around conflict.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think through the work of the fund, we're trying to think how we can, you know, enable that sort of working at, and you know, how I talked about the Learning to Action Network, for example, if there's something we can do there to help shine a light on this issue, to help look at particular examples or ways of working that would be beneficial, we'd be more than happy to share or to listen to those suggestions and share that more widely and try do something, you know, focused around this particular area, because we recognise that it's a difficult one and one that's sort of universally challenging. So it's worth having that particular attention on it.
Okay, thanks. I am going to wrap it up at this point, and hopefully when we get to the breakouts, people have opportunity to mull things over and to have some more discussion about it. But I do want to move to the workshops in a moment. Oh, and I'll just address the question in the comment about the slides. What we will be doing after the session is we'll be creating a blog page, which will have the recordings of the keynotes, the presentations from our keynote speakers and from the workshops, and a summary of discussion. And once we've done that, we will circulate all that material to everyone who's attended, and obviously publicize it more widely, so people who weren't able to come today will be able to access that material, and any links to any materials that get discussed here will go in that blog as well. So it will all be widely circulated and made available. Moving on, our next section is workshops, which is some examples of alternative approaches which are already operational in practice. As Neil was saying, this isn't hypotheticals. These are things that you can actually do. And in various parts of Scotland, people are doing some different things. So we have 4 workshops, which you'll see from the programme, and you'll see on the second page of your agenda that I sent out with just a little bit more detail. The workshop 1 will be the Glasgow North and North West Family Wellbeing Partnership. Workshop 2 will be the Elevate PSP. Workshop 3 will be a discussion about collaborative working in the Highland Council area. And workshop 4 will be will be about Dundee, and we'll hear from Bernardo's and Action for Children about how things have been working there. The way we're going to do the workshops is that in a second, Christina, who's doing the technicals for this session, will open the workshops as breakout rooms, and you will all have the opportunity to place yourself in the workshop of your choice. So I'd ask you to, if the workshop you're heading for seems really busy, to perhaps spread yourselves around a bit. They're all really, really interesting. There isn't time for you to to have a whole day of this and for you to have to go to them all. So as I say, that's why we'll be taking notes, and we'll be sharing the presentations later, but it will give you an opportunity to hear about some different things. If you find with your particular version of Zoom or the particular equipment you're coming in on won't allow you to move yourself into the workshop, then just stay in the main room, and Christina will help you to move to the workshop of your choice. She will basically be able to pick you up and put you in there. So I'm just checking, Christina, are we all ready for that? And are the workshop leaders all ready to move to that?